Okay, so Echo, you want to get started?
Yeah, thank you, Guyver, for putting the poster up there in the chat for all the rallies that's happening on Saturday. So thank you for joining tonight. I'm so glad to see so many people, maybe some new people coming in. So the theme of today's meeting is teach in on the Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act. And as you continue to come in, please drop your name and your region. And if you're a regional coordinator, please make your announcements in the chat as well.
Yeah, go ahead to one side.
And please mute yourself if you are not talking. So hopefully we have some good discussion after this presentation today, and that we come up with some strategic next steps for our advocacy work. We kind of made this slide with the map of our chapters and caucuses, because after the DC July 27th event, Kathy and I have been meeting with many of the chapters and the caucuses coordinators. And a good number of chapters are having coordinator transitions as the young folks and the new folks are volunteering to step up to lead the movement. So we have created the map, renewed the map of our chapters. Yay. So we're seeing, you're seeing 12 regional chapters where we are located and the 3 caucuses that we currently have. If you don't know your chapter leader, please email me or Kathy and we'll be sure to get you connected. So one of the important work as Korea Peace Now Grassroots Network in our movement is organizing the grassroots, but also doing the legislative advocacy. So why and how do we do our advocacy? We have an actual bill in our Congress that we can advocate for. So that's the topic of today's session. Before we go into the details of the bill, Kathy will provide a short background on the Korean War Armistice and HR 1369.
So just to give us some background, I'm sure so many of us know this history, but it was a good refresher for me actually to just look back at the armistice agreement, the text of it itself. And I think a lot of us know already, that the armistice was never supposed to be a permanent agreement. And actually within its own preamble, it contemplates the fact that it's supposed to be a temporary holdover measure. It says until a final peaceful settlement is achieved. This armistice is just meant to be a ceasefire, just a mere cessation of hostilities. And then actually towards the end of the agreement itself, the military commanders on both sides agreed that within 90 days, they would come back to the table to negotiate a peace conference. I'm sorry, a peaceful settlement and an actual peace agreement. This never happened in the 90-day period that was contemplated here. In 1954, there was a meeting at the Geneva Convention, which also resolved issues related to the Indochina War, but did nothing to resolve the issue of Korea, whether there would be reunification. And so just this temporary holdover measure just continued because no one could come to an agreement at the 1954 Geneva Convention. And then, now we have this armistice agreement 70 years later. And as we see with constant escalations on the peninsula, that affects us both here in the United States and obviously our sisters and brothers in Korea, this agreement is not keeping the peace. So I think this is me. So then along these lines, activists, from Women Cross DMZ and other organizations, Korean Americans, peace activists, anti-war groups got together and thought, okay, well, how can we actually push this through Congress? How can we make a dent within the US government? The idea of ending war it can feel so overwhelming in terms of a task of, we have the legislative, executive, judicial branches, we have the Department of Defense, we have all of these different actors. And so the idea of, saying end the Korean War, okay, well, what is like a specific tool we can use to push the agenda? And the strategy around HRES 152 was to push this through Congress as an expression of political will. So HRS 152 is not a bill as we have today, but a House resolution. So it doesn't have the same effect or impact as the bill, but that was in 2019. And Congressman Ro Khanna introduced that. And then that was followed by, in 2021, the introduction of HR 3446, which was the first ever of its kind, a bill, congressional bill calling for peace on the Korean Peninsula, for pushing the way forward for a peace agreement. And we got 46 co-sponsors on that. And then now we have HR 1369. So you see the history, it's both long and also relatively short in a 70-year war. You know, we're working with 4 now years of advocacy, which to many of us might seem like, wow, we have precedent. But in 70 years, you know, this is kind of one of the first tools in the history of Korea peace activism that we are getting through Congress in this way. So it's very exciting. And this was the latest bill, which was basically a reintroduction of 3446, so largely asking for the same things, which we'll get into. It already has 35 co-sponsors, and we got 7 new co-sponsors just within the past few months after our advocacy week, which many of you joined. So thank you for that. Okay, now we'll get into what it actually does.
Yeah, so what does Peace on the Korean Peninsula Act do? So the bill calls for serious, urgent diplomacy in pursuit of a binding peace agreement to formally end the Korean War. Once the bill is passed, it requires a report from the Secretary of State describing a clear roadmap for achieving a permanent peace agreement on the Korean Peninsula. The bill also expresses a sense of Congress that the Secretary of State should seek to enter negotiations with North Korea to establish liaison offices in each country's capital. It'll require the Secretary of State to conduct a full review of the travel restrictions to North Korea and submit a report to Congress outlining qualifying criteria for exemptions to the restrictions, especially for those wishing to return to North Korea for family-related issues. So this is, as Kathy mentioned, a historical bill that in 2021, it was the first time in the US Congress that this kind of bill was introduced in our Congress. But as much as we support the bill and as much as we utilize it as a tool for our movement, there are conservatives opposing this bill. And there has been an attack on the bill, Brad Sherman, and the grassroots movement. So last month, you are seeing a clip of this ad. A giant ad ran in the Honolulu Star-Advertiser, warning that HR 1369 is dangerous. The same ad ran back in September 2021, as well as a huge digital billboard on Times Square. They were paid for by Annie M.H. Chen, the secretive oligarch that is bankrolling right-wing organizations attacking our Korea peace movement. So this right-wing network, which includes operatives like Lawrence Peck, are red-baiting Korean American peace activists and scaremongering about Korea peace legislation in order to maintain US forever war in Korea and fan the flames of great power competition between the US and China in order to benefit Chan's business interests. So for more information about Ms. Chan, we highly encourage you to read this excellent investigative report that ran in The Nation last year by reporter Eli Clifton. Kathy, are you going to post the link, the chat? Okay. So the bottom line is they are threatened by us because of the growing power and visibility of our Korea peace movement. But we want to take this opportunity to address the falsehoods being perpetuated about HR 1369 so that we know how to fight back. That's our presentation tonight. Now, Kathy will go over the myths that was covered in the ad.
So the first myth that is listed in this ad, just to remind us, in this ad right here, is that the United States has tried to negotiate with North Korea, but every attempt has failed. And quote, real positive change requires that North Korea be serious about reform. And furthermore, HR 1369 will eliminate the need for US troops on the Korean Peninsula. So if you just look at the history of US-Korea relations, it's been the United States that has been the main obstacle to peace with North Korea. And by insisting on denuclearization on part of North Korea up front, US administrations time after time have failed to make progress on improving the security crisis on the peninsula and have actually exacerbated the problem. Nuclear scientist and Professor Siegfried Hecker, who spoke at our July 27th DC conference, gets into, in his latest book, Hinge Points, how the US has missed several key opportunities over the years to make progress with North Korea. And you also have Bruce Cummings at that same conference talking about how it was the US who first introduced nuclear weapons to Korea and has used nuclear blackmail, that was the phrase used by Professor Cummings, and intimidation time and time again. So we also know that history has shown us that whenever the US and North Korea have been engaged in diplomacy, rather than in escalation of tensions, there's been a decrease in provocations from North Korea and actually tangible reductions in militarization and tension. So, for example, we've seen in history that North Korea has self-imposed a moratorium on nuclear and long-range missile testings. The US and South Korea has scaled back war drills. North and South Korean soldiers have demined portions of the DMZ. We've had family reunions. We've actually even had a creation of a liaison office in Kaesong. So we see that a peace agreement and efforts at diplomacy, which could culminate in a peace agreement, would give North Korea the security assurances it says it needs in order to eventually denuclearize. And furthermore, continuing the status quo of war drills, sanctions, pressure, isolation is irresponsible and dangerous and increases the risk of nuclear war. And the ongoing state of war represents constant risk and threat to national security, our own security here at home, the security of our allies, and that military escalation would just be a huge loss for all parties involved, from the United States, North Korea, South Korea, and all of the surrounding regions. So the common narrative is that the armistice is keeping the peace that we have right now, but we know that the situation we have right now is not peace, that we have people suffering from the imposition of sanctions. We have people who are not able to get medical need and aid in North Korea. We have families separated, including Korean Americans here in the US. We have people suffering from pollution and along all of the bases that are currently existing in South Korea, including, as you all know, the largest US military base overseas at Camp Humphreys. And the US has come dangerously close to bombing North Korea multiple times. And overall, just taking a step back, looking at the framing of this myth, it hides what is really the imbalance of power on the peninsula, where the US far outstrips North Korea in terms of military, economic, and other forms of power and access. So this peace agreement would de-escalate tensions. It would accord mutual benefits to both North and South Korea and the United States. And also on this last point, this idea that it would eliminate need for US troops is just factually inaccurate. HR 1369 just would not be the governing document about the presence of US troops in South Korea. The actual legal basis of this is the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1953. And so the bottom line is the current approach has not worked for 70 years, and we need a new approach. And we'll never fundamentally change the relationship between US and North Korea unless we put peace first. And so here you can take this link. Well, I'll send it actually afterwards, but if you go to our conference video recording, you'll see very compelling presentations from Bruce Cummings during the keynote and Sig Hecker on the threat of nuclear war. That's panel 2. And they get more into the research and the discussions of the history that I've alluded to here.
Okay, busting myth 2. HR 1369 will allow North Korea to get access to hard currency from Korean Americans that will be used to fund military, nuclear, missile development, and the potential to use American visitors as hostages. Well, the fact is this argument is not only specious, but hides the real issue, which is that we need to eliminate the ongoing state of war that is perpetuating extreme militarism. on the Korean Peninsula. And the best way to do that is by replacing the armistice with a permanent peace agreement. North Korea has continued to develop nuclear weapons, even though there has been a near total ban on US citizens traveling to North Korea since 2017. And they have offered no proof that we have seen none that currency from Korean Americans has been used to fund North Korea's weapons development. Furthermore, preventing the delivery of humanitarian aid and the reunion of separated families on this false argument fails to recognize the rights of the North Korean people to live in peace and the rights of Americans to see their family members. Prior to 2017 travel ban, hundreds of Americans visited North Korea without incident. Only 22 people have been detained in the entire history of US travel to North Korea. The lack of official channels of communication between the US and North Korea is a result of the ongoing war and another reason why we need to end this war. The bottom line is that the best way to halt the unchecked militarism in Korea is to end the war, normalize relations, and establish permanent peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. Busting myth number 3. HR 1369 will reward North Korea with diplomatic recognition and signal that the US has finally given in and recognized the Kim regime. The fact is, peace is a reward for everyone, North Koreans, South Koreans, and those in the US. And this is why more than half of Americans support a peace agreement. Being in a state of peace with North Korea is not a gift or stamp of approval. It is meant to be the norm, and keep the risk of catastrophic violence off the table. The United States normalized relations with China, which was also a party to the Korean War. There's no reason why we can't normalize relations with. The DMZ has thousands of troops sitting just a few miles away apart every day. Every day there's a risk of something could go wrong. Continuing that risk is irresponsible. North Korea exists whether the US government likes it or not. Instead of wishing the situation to be as Washington wants it, the Biden administration must deal with the situation as it is. We cannot control their behavior, but only our own. And the US approach has not only failed to resolve the security crisis, but has exacerbated the problem. North Korea has more nuclear weapons than ever before. Continuing to insist on North Korea giving up its nuclear weapons is a recipe for failure. It's time to try a new approach by putting peace at the beginning, not the end of the process.
So just some takeaways overall, as I see in the chat, there's a desire for this more published, and I think we will be putting some of this together, at least for social media. But for now, there will be, we'll share also these readings. The longer we urge you to look at the conference, the GW conference, hinge points, Cummings, research. Right now, the takeaways I'd like to highlight is that, as we've seen, maintaining the status quo is dangerous and immoral and a recipe for failure. And for 70 years, it's, as the former organizer Hyun Lee with Women Across DMZ said, the US has tried this approach and have come up empty-handed. And the other takeaway is that those who attack this bill, the solution that we've offered of a pathway forward that gets us away from nuclear warfare, they do this by perpetuating false narratives about the root causes of the problem. And furthermore, they never offer any solutions. And as we've seen towards the beginning of our presentation, where we highlighted who exactly is funding these attacks, they have financial incentives for maintaining this forever war in Korea and for fanning the flames of this power competition between US and China. And finally, we'll just emphasize the bottom line, and our narrative that we want to push forward is that ending the Korean War and replacing it with the armistice agreement with the lasting binding peace agreement is in everyone's interest. And so here, we see this, as many of you were there, our DC gathering, our DC mobilization. And then here we have protested in South Korea on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the armistice.